There we go. I've waited so long to do that. I've had this drink. I've been so thirsty, ready, waiting for us to start recording so I could open the can on air.
Well, it's okay, because this is, if you're tuning in today, this is not our regularly scheduled podcast. You'll notice that, because this is up on, like, a Sunday or a Monday.
Yeah.
So
this is a bonus, because we missed a week.
This is a bonus because we missed many weeks, but it wasn't planned as a bonus. I recently watched League of Legends World Championship, and I found... sorry, not League of Legends. I watched the Dota World Championship, okay? And I don't watch Dota during the year at all. And I went into watching the International and went, what the fuck do I care about here? What am I watching? Why do I care about these teams? What are their stories since the last International, since the last big event? So today we're going to make we've got a video together. We're going to talk about tiers of teams that you probably know about and what have they gone through since the last major to get to today, where we're vaguely ranking them. This is not our official rankings for the major, but we had to denote them somehow based on what the expectations were and stuff. Yeah. So this is our what the fuck has happened in the last 6 months, so that way you can watch the major even if you haven't been watching Counter-Strike every week.
Yeah.
That's what this video is going to be called.
I think it's best to start at the top because there's some really juicy shit at the bottom.
Yeah, so, okay, as I said before, this is organized by teams. And
organized by chaos, is what it's organized by.
Each team, I want to talk about where they were 6 months ago and how they finished in the Copenhagen Major. I want to talk about what have they done in between, and then I think we'll give a quick synopsis of why they're in the tier I've put them in.
Yes.
So Elliot has had next to no input on the tiers, but I believe you agree with basically everyone and where I've put them.
It's not far off.
Roughly enough.
Yeah.
So let's start with NAVI.
Yeah. So NAVI won the last major.
Yeah, they are there. They won the last major. That's why
if you're coming in with no knowledge whatsoever, NAVI were a big surprise last major. No, like they weren't like a complete dark horse, but they were maybe like the 4th or 5th best team in the world at the time. They hadn't really won any events, but they had a lot of players who had done well individually at previous majors. They had an in-game leader who's been around the block and was very highly regarded within the scene.
But never won anything.
But hadn't really won much, no. They had an AWPer who was replacing Simple, the greatest player of all time, who was kind of went under the radar because he was replacing Simple. And then they had Bit, who was once this wonder kid. He won his first ever major without dropping a map. Kind of lost his way a bit, but he always had that talent. And all the stars just aligned for the major, and they won it. But importantly, since then, they've become the best team in the world, or at least almost certainly top 2 for everyone. They have continued their major form. They had a little dip afterwards, and then they became good, and then they became really good. And then they became, pretty indisputably the best for a bit. Now, most recently, G2 have won an event, which we'll get to. But NAVI are at least the 2nd best team in the world. And there's basically no debate about that.
Yeah. They are the team that if we were to have betting odds on this major, not that either of us bet on esports, but no. If we were to have betting odds on the major, this would be the betting favorite for the majors, for NAVI to come back.
I would imagine so. Yeah.
So in the last 6 months...
I might look up the odds just to see what...
I'm kind of curious, but we'll see. NAVI have made absolutely 0 roster moves. They won the major. They have stuck the same. They've won events. They've come through. So since that point, the big events that we'll say that they won since the last major was the Esports World Cup in July. Not a huge event, but definitely a worthwhile event.
Yes,
there were a lot of good teams there. They took 2nd place in Cologne. That was to G2? Vitality. That's to Vitality. They took 1st place in Pro League Season 20. They took 2nd place in Fall Final for Blast. And they took 1st place in IEM Rio. And they didn't place in Blast World Finals Premier whatever that event's called. There's too many events. So basically, if they were in an event, they either got first or second place for the most part since the major.
Yeah, which basically sums up. They have consistently been the best team in the world. It's not even like the other teams at the top. See, their level seems to wander a bit. Navi, we won't talk about the most recent event for because it ruins that narrative.
Yeah,
they went out last in that most recent event, but it is the one just before the major.
Also it felt like a fluke.
It felt like they weren't that invested. Maybe we'll look back after the major and go, maybe that was a sign that they weren't completely right. But they've basically been consistently the best team in the world, and then other teams occasionally peak at a similar level, but nobody is as consistently good as NAVI. If you were picking a favourite, it's NAVI, just without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, I feel quite confident in saying that.
Okay, I can't find odds for the actual major just yet because nobody knows what team's actually in it yet.
That's a good point.
The RMRs are still yet to come. If you're qualifiers.
We're recording pre-RMR, so we're a little ahead, which is why
we're opening ourselves up to a little bit of
some tomfoolery,
ridicule by doing this. Like some of the teams on here might not be at the major, and some of the ones that we've said won't make it out of the RMR might make it out of the RMR. You never know.
Yeah. All right. So that's where Navi's at. Let's go to the next team on the list, which is Vitality. Mm-hmm. If you were to tell me Navi doesn't win the major, Vitality would be one of my 2 or 3 choices to say they will win the major instead.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But I feel less confident in Vitality than I did maybe a month or 2 ago.
I agree.
They were consistently very dominant against teams outside of the top 4, and they've sort of wavered on that a little bit. They're still very good. They still have a very good core. Zowu, Spinks, Flames, Mezzi. I mean, even Apex at times. Like, these are all good players. There's multiple majors amongst them. This is a good team. Like, they are a very good team who seem to just fall short of the best team in the world a little too often.
So this team, similar to Navi, they did not go under any roster changes since the last major. The team's been together for about a year. The last move that happened was replacing Dupree, and they brought Mezzi in 11 months ago. Once the major's actually fully going, it will just be a year at that point. Mm-hmm. They finished 3rd, 4th in the Copenhagen major. They lost in the semifinals.
Which has kind of been their story for a lot of this year.
Yeah. So past that point, though, 2nd place at Pro League Season 19, 2nd place in Dallas, 3rd, 4th in spring finals, 1st through 4th in fall groups, which is a weird tournament to begin with, 1st place in Cologne, 3rd, 4th in fall final, 3rd, 4th in world final. They are perennially the 2nd, 3rd, 4th team in a given event.
Yeah, I mean the winning Cologne is the
yeah, that's a big deal. I will say that is a big deal. But you look at the rest of their history since the major, it has been kind of 2nd, 3rd, 4th in that ballpark.
And they've also, in the World Final, which was the big event in the warm-up to the RMR, they were not playing with a full roster. Mezzi...
Jax.
Jax was playing with instead of Mezzi because Mezzi's just had a kid. And even though he'll be back for the RMR, he's just had a kid.
Yeah, you don't know what the...
he might not have slept.
So, they are... Regardless of the 3rd, 4th, with a team of Vitality's caliber, they are securely in the expected to win the major category.
Yes, they're in the expected to finish top 4 in the major, I would say. Hoping to win expected top 4.
If they don't make top 4, something has gone terribly wrong, I think you'd generally say. Or they've lost in the quarterfinals, which is its own matter, but they will make playoffs.
Yeah.
They should make top 4. They should have a shot to win the major.
Yeah.
That's where we stand.
And I will say, if you're completely new, you don't really know anything that's going on. If you're English or French, this is probably your team. No Englishman, no Britishman has ever won a major, or realistically come very close. Messi is from England, and this team has 2 French players. There's not really many French players anymore. France used to be a stronghold in Counter-Strike. Less
I
so
think they're
nowadays.
actually the only 2 French players we have on the list today.
On the list, yeah. I mean, there's 3D Max, who will be in the RMRs, who are a French team. There's Hadji playing in the Asia RMR, who's French. There are French players dotted around, but if you're French, Vitality are almost certainly your team, because Zaiwu is definitely the best French player ever, one of the best players ever, and he is very much French. And Apex is also
Apex
a bit
is
of a hero.
French.
Apex is as French as you can be.
All right. Let's move on to the next team. So the next team I have on the list, we have both G2 and Spirit, and the reason I'm bringing them up in conjunction is these lists were the tiers is vaguely ordered left to right.
Yeah.
But G2 and Spirit kind of feel that they're in a roughly equal state. And it
No, I
depends
disagree.
You disagree. Okay, so
I think you
about
could
G2.
move Spirit down a tier and it wouldn't be unfair.
Let's talk about G2, and then we can get to we can talk about Spirit after in that regard. So G2 have made moves since the last major. Let's start there. So G2, they ended the last major in 3rd, 4th. They also lost in the semis. And a couple months ago, they made the switch. They used to have this roster with Nexa and Huxi. I believe Nexa was on the roster for the major, for the last major. I had to check. I wasn't sure if JK.
Nexa, I believe, was also on the roster when they made the grand final.
They were. He was. But after that major, people were disappointed. They retooled the roster and added MOUZ at that point from M80 and Snacks, who was the IGL on GamerLegion, but you probably know him better as one of the better players on the Virtus.Pro roster that almost won the major in 2017 and did win the major previously.
And if you don't know him at all because you're completely new, Snacks is what I would describe as everyone's second favourite player.
Yeah,
everyone loves Snacks. He's really tall, really big guy, very, very dry, funny. And in his prime, he was a wonderful player on a team that everyone loved. Now, look, there was a thing going around that he hadn't had a positive map. He hadn't gone like 12 and 8
or something like that.
in like a month. It was bad. But the thing with G2 is Snacks doesn't have to frag.
So let's talk about the other players on this team, because I think we talked about on Navi that there's like Wonderful and Bit. We talked about on Vitality that Zaiwu is the show. On G2, it's actually easier to figure out who is not the show than who is the show.
Yeah.
So G2
is all show. They are all mouth, all trousers.
G2 have the best opera in the world in MongoZ.
The best player in the world.
The best player in the world, really. So yeah, let's be real. The best player in the world in MongoZ. An absolute came onto the roster 2 years ago from Navi Academy, Navi Junior, Young Navi, whatever it's called. There's only three versions of what an Academy team can be called.
Navi Folia de.
So MongoZ came up. He was good to start with and has only gotten better and better.
It was great to start with.
Okay, he was great to start with.
His first event was IEM Katowice. He won a 1v3 against Simple, Electronic, and Perfecto. It's like
he was
one of the scariest trios ever to grace World Counter-Strike. He won a 1v3 at 16 on stage against them. He was cold from day one. Now he is just the best player in the world. He's just absolutely smurfed a world final.
Yeah, he's
battered everyone.
He's incredible.
He's
behind him, we have the two Bosnians. We have Nico, who at one point was considered possibly the best player in the world. I won't say that he was, but between MOUZ and FaZe was absolutely up there for one of the best players in the world, and has lost some form since that point, but is still an incredibly good rifler and an incredible pistol player. His cousin Hunter, and then we have
his cousin's name is Hunter.
His cousin's name is Hunter.
No, he hasn't signed somebody who is hunting his cousin. We should.
I was just gonna go buy him, but I feel bad about that. No,
Hunter's very, very good.
Hunter has been very, very, very good. So Hunter is it was for a very long time one of the best lurkers in Counter-Strike. he has kind of fallen off to a degree.
He's not as consistent as he used to be. His peak is still extremely high. He's still a very intelligent player. He just sometimes he just doesn't look as good as he used to. It does happen. But he's very good. Nico, again, for people who are completely new, Nico is, by a lot of people, considered the greatest rifler of all time in Counter-Strike. However, the monkey's paw unfurls. He has never won a major. He's come close a couple times, but has lost
very close.
He's lost 2 major finals in like excruciating fashion. He lost one to a big underdog where his team choked a 4-round lead to go to overtime, and he lost one where he was having an unbelievable map. They were on the comeback, and he has a chance to kill Simple, and Simple's not looking at him, and he misses. He dies. They lose the round. They lose the game, and they lose the final. So he's somebody everyone either really roots for or really roots against. He's quite divisive. He's quite emotional, but he's very talented.
He's very talented. The 4th player on this roster, and I cannot believe we were saying the 4th player in conjunction with this person's name, is MOUZ from M80. So MOUZ came in partway through the season. They decided they needed more firepower, because of course G2 decided they needed more firepower, and brought in MOUZ. MOUZ is possibly the best Deagle player on the world.
MOUZ is dynamite.
He's
so good.
Incredible. And I think here is the place in where we point out that this roster has an expiration date.
Yeah.
So this roster, we know for a fact, will not be the same after the major.
Yeah.
Nico is going to another team that we will talk about during this video.
A lot later.
A lot later. And MOUZ is basically, if you were to take Nico from 3 or 4 years ago, put him into a lab, and bring him to 2024, that's MOUZ.
Yeah.
Without the inability to close out a major.
Yeah, MOUZ is a young guy, very, very talented, mechanically near flawless. But he's also from Guatemala, which is a region that we've basically never seen a top-tier Counter-Strike player from, or any Counter-Strike player from. So he's kind of carrying a whole nation on his back. It also makes him North American. So if you're, North American, gives you some route to a top-tier team.
Yeah,
the team's great. They're great fun.
The last player is next, but the other bit here, before we get to the events that they've kind of gone through since the major, is this team is very flip-floppy.
Yeah.
This team is incredibly flip-floppy. So if you heard all of the last couple of minutes of us talking about G2 and how good every single player is, just know, when you watch a G2 game, you may have a heart attack if you're actively rooting for G2. Yeah. If you are rooting for chaos and fun Counter-Strike, you will have an excellent time watching G2 because it will be chaotic and fun. And MongolZ will hit some of the most incredible shots you've ever seen in your life, followed by some of the dumbest play I've ever seen in my life.
Look, if you've come from League of Legends, imagine this team is 2019 G2. You even have like an old Polish man rolling around. It's perfect. That's what you're getting. They are one of the best teams in the world, who might just be the worst team in the world on any given day, and you don't know when that day is coming. And they also will probably not win the major because Nico's cursed, and they'll lose in the final or something.
So some highlights since the major: they took 3rd, 4th in IEM Chengdu. They took 1st place in Dallas. I will put an asterisk here that there was a stand-in for Dallas of the name Stewie2K.
Funniest team in the world. They are the funniest team in the world.
They took 2nd place in the Esports World Cup, 1st through 4th in Blast Fall Groups, 3rd, 4th in Pro League Season 20, 1st place in Blast Fall Final, and 1st place in Blast Premier World Final, which is that tournament we just talked about that happened about a week ago.
Yeah.
This team should make playoffs, should make top 4.
Oh, G2 should make the final.
Yes.
I think they're at least the second best team. Is them and NAVI are the 2 best teams in the world for me right now. but they also might go like not make it out of the RMR. That is a distinct possibility with this team.
That's why I put them below Vitality. Vitality are at least consistently in the place.
Do you rate a consistent 7 over 1 week of 3 and 1 week of 10? I don't know.
Our next team on the list is the last team that I expect to be in playoffs. You're a little more unsure of. I expect to be in top four.
They just don't have the bottle. They just don't have the bottle to win.
Let's
Katowice happened. I know Katowice happened. Donk dropped a 1.7 at Katowice.
Let's back up for a minute. Let's back up for a minute. Let's talk about who this team is first, and then we can get to why you don't think they should win the major. This team is made up of 4 Russians and 1 Ukrainian. The big player on this team is Donk. He is the
big metaphorically. He's quite little.
Yeah,
literally.
He's quite small. But 17-year-old has, we talked about how like MOUZ has possibly one of the best like mechanics in the game, or MongolZ has some of the best mechanics in the game. The other player up there is Donk.
Yeah.
Donk, the guy he's incredible.
Donk's silly. Like in his first ever big event, he literally dropped the best event ever, and that's not taking it. Like he had the highest rating, some of like the highest kills per round numbers we've ever seen. It was his first event. He was 16 years old, and it was IEM Katowice. Again, if you don't follow Counter-Strike, one of the 2 biggest non-major events of the year.
It's like MSI. Let's be clear. If you're in the League of Legends world, it's the MSI equivalent.
Yeah, he basically went to MSI and just shit down everyone's throat. He was unbelievable in that event. He's not quite been that good since, but he's still really, really good.
So this team has a couple players behind him. I think the next one to talk about is Shiro. So Shiro,
which might give you a hint as to,
there's a drop off here. So Shiro, if you watch Counter-Strike in 2020 and about the COVID times, you'll remember Shiro from the Gambit roster that did a lot of damage in 2020 and 2021. He's off that Gambit roster, which we'll talk about later. And he's onto the Spirit roster. He looked like a renewed player when he first joined, but has not he's been fine since that point. I won't say he's been bad. He's been fine.
He's just a bit meek. It's the only way I can describe Shiro. He just doesn't quite impose his will enough. And I think, that's my thoughts on him.
Zontix and Magix are the next 2 players you talk about on this team. Zontix is quite good, but can be flip-floppy.
He's okay. He's nothing special in my eyes. He's okay.
Magix is I would say a good support player.
Magix is he's fallen off recently, which has been a large part of Spirit's problem in recent events. But usually he's a very versatile player. He can kind of do a bit of everything that you want a Counter-Strike player to do. And he used to just like not really make mistakes, and he was just very reliable. Recently, he's not been as good as he used to.
And then the last player on this team is Chopper. If you used to watch Counter-Strike in 2017, you'll remember him from Vega Squadron. That would be the team that knocked NIP out of the major.
I would say NIP. If you haven't watched since 2017, NIP have literally never recovered from that loss, and that's that is not a joke. They have never recovered from losing to Vega Squad. He broke them permanently.
There will be a rude awakening as we continue down this list.
But Chopper broke NIP permanently.
But Chopper has kind of led this team to be a consistently good team. I won't say consistently great team, but a consistently good team.
Again, like they have peaks and troughs, and their troughs are worse than most of the other big teams.
So they made playoffs in the last major. Mm-hmm. They ended 5th, 8th, which means they lost in quarterfinals. If I remember correctly, they lost to FaZe in the quarterfinals, who were the eventual major runner-ups.
Finalists, yeah.
Since that point, they've taken 2nd in BetBoom Daha Belgrade. They've taken 3rd, 4th in Dallas. 1st in Blast Premier Spring Final. 1st in BetBoom Daha Belgrade. But we've talked a lot about good things. They also have not finished top couple in Esports World Cup, Cologne, Pro League Season 20, or Fall Finals.
And they really shit the bed in a few of them. Like they have bad periods. The one thing I'll say about Spirit is outside of Chopper, they're all like 20 maximum. I think Donk's 17, Magix is like 19, Zontix is like 18. something like that. They're all so
Shira's
young.
23, Magic's
Shira's
is
a little
21,
older.
Zonic's 19, Donk is 17,
All right.
Chopper's 27.
Yeah, so they're still super young. Shiro, like I say, he's been around a while now, but he actually is still quite young. He came up in a period where there was no stage games, so he's still actually quite inexperienced on stage. Even now, like he hasn't had the same experience that some of those Vitality players have, some of those G2 players have on stage. He doesn't have that, and he is like him and Donk. They're superstars, and they're just both so wet, like they're so like wet behind the ears. Is that the phrase?
Yeah.
Like they're so young still. They're still so inexperienced. I just don't think they quite have the mettle to beat. I can't see them winning a major playoff game against G2, Vitality, NAVI. I just can't see it.
I agree, but I also see them winning it over basically everyone in the tier we have below, which is
but you have to beat one of those to win a major, usually, nearly always.
Yeah. All right, so let's get to the tier below then.
Yeah, because we're already at 26.
Yeah, I was gonna say we're gonna start hurrying up here. I think this tier deserves a little bit of conversation because we're gonna have some questions about this tier. The next team we have on the list is Team Liquid. Now, I will start that if you're a fan, if you have watched Counter-Strike, this is not a North American team anymore. This team has gone about 7 different ways since the last major.
Yeah.
I think the biggest place for us to start is at the last major, they had Cadian, they had Skulls, and they were coached by Zeus. Today, in November, they have Ultimate, they have JKS, and they are coached by Mither. Mither is the former Astralis talent coach.
And
he was
MOUZ.
a North coach. He was
at
the
MOUZ
Apex
as
coach just before this.
Okay.
Which Apex made it quite far at the last global offensive major. Yes, at the last.
Yeah, in Paris. Yeah, it was in Paris. They made it to the final. No, semi-final.
So, this team is on paper extremely good with Twists and NAF, which are the two of the last couple real North American players that are relevant. There will be a couple more on this list. We have a team full of them, but they're really like the last couple like North American players that have a chance of winning something.
I would say MOUZ, but yes, I'd take them.
Is Guatemala North America? I'd consider Guatemala Central America.
It is. Well, Central America doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's on content, but
he's technically North American. He also like is like culturally North American, and like he talks to all the other players.
They added JKS, who is the only Australian, I believe, on our entire list today. Of teams
on our list, yes, there are some other Australian players.
Yeah, so FlyQuest is a team that will almost certainly make the major. They're a team full of Australians, but if you are an Australian fan and want to root for a team that has Australians on it that may actually do damage, this would be the team to root for.
Yeah, but yeah, FlyQuest are like nominally your team if you're Australian, but this is your second team probably.
This is your second team. So that they made changes. They haven't won a huge amount of events. They've definitely done stuff, but they haven't won a huge amount of events.
So the thing with Liquid is they looked really good when they first made this roster, but then they had like a mental block where they just couldn't beat FaZe, and it just stopped them going to playoffs a few times.
Well, hold on. Before we start talking about them going to playoffs, let's start with where they were at the last major, because the answer is not in Europe.
Quite.
They did not make the last major with this roster. They were the 6th team out in the RMR. It means they lost. They were the only. They were the first team out. They were behind Furia, Imperial, Legacy, Pain, and Complexity to make it out of the America's RMR at the earlier major this year. So they weren't even there.
Yeah.
Since that point, they've played in a lot of open qualifiers, and they have not done a huge amount of damage, right? They didn't place very well in Dallas. They got fourth in fall groups for Blast, but that's kind of our big accomplishment here. You may be asking us, why is this team ranked so high on our list then?
Well, the answer is because the teams below them aren't all that convincing. But also, like, this team legitimately looked like one of the best teams in the world, like, for a month or two after forming. Ultimate was this just, like... Basically, he was only on the radar of, like, tier 2 casters. who would just be like, oh yeah, I've watched this guy play, he's pretty good, I'm not sure he's ready for this. Twist watched like loads of his demos and just went, yeah, no, this guy's the shit. He looked like he was completely right at first. Ultimate was like absolutely dicking people down. He was really, really good. Recently, I think he's been studied. He's struggling a little bit more, and Liquid are feeling it because he was very much like an X factor for them. He was part of the reason, maybe the biggest part of the reason they were able to muscle past some of these teams. Counter-Strike a lot of the time will come down to which team has the better AWPer. If in League it's like a better jungler wins. A lot of time in Counter-Strike the better AWPer wins. Not always, but a lot of time the better AWPer wins. Liquid's AWPer is, again, still quite raw. He's talented. He is a very good player. I just worry about him when it comes to the really big games. Does he have enough in his locker to change it up when Karrigan has studied everything he can do?
I will also note that since that major, not only did the players change, but the roles changed. When they removed Cadian, they did not bring on another IGL. They actually, Twists came up and said he was doing it. And as with the ultimate thing, this team looked lights out for a month or two after. There weren't that many events, and they definitely lost. They were not placing incredibly well, but you saw it, they passed the eye test. Mm-hmm. Regardless of whatever the events tab says, they passed the eye test.
Yeah, they were good. They were really good.
They are still good.
Mm-hmm. They're just not quite top tier.
They're not quite the next tier.
There's a world where they come into this, they've figured out whatever the issues are plaguing them, and they come in and they're like the third best team in the world. That world exists.
No, there is a real bit of that. So, for knowledge, the first 4 teams we talked about are ranked very highly. They are actually the top 4 teams in HLTV's ranking as of this minute. Team Liquid is down at 11 and 12, but I feel quite confident that they are in this tier.
Yeah.
Next team we have on the board is MOUZ. This is a team that's formerly MOUZ Sports. It is basically a team of full academy players that have been brought up to be on this main roster over the last couple of years.
Plus Brolan.
Let's start with the star of the show, the stars of the show, which is Torzy and Exertion, who are
Yimfat.
And Yimfat. Okay,
it's
Torzy, Exertion, and Yimfat.
Yeah, it's quite hard to pick a star on this team because they're kind of all really good, but that's also sort of their problem.
This team cannot win in playoffs, is what we have found.
They don't have a guy who in a playoff game is just going to say, fuck this, I'm winning. Like, they don't have Magisk in Paris. They don't have Nico in Katowice. Like, they don't have these players that just go, no, we're not losing this fucking game. Put me here, I'm getting 2 kills. They don't have that.
So, with that, they haven't made any roster moves, but I will note one thing that they have switched since the major, and this was actually pre-last major, but it was close enough that I'm willing to talk about it now, is they brought Zipnix, formerly the Astralis Clutch King, in as an assistant coach. And I don't know if it's helped or not, but I think it is worthwhile to talk about a player who has that much experience coaching and helping a roster with not that much experience.
Yeah, I don't know how much it's helped. I feel like MOUZ are the same team they were at the last major, to be honest. And I don't think the conversation around MOUZ has changed significantly since the last major.
No,
they're still probably like 5th or 6th in the world. They can win any event, but they just kind of get the yips on stage.
So speaking of can win any event, they took 2nd place in Chengdu. They took 1st place in ESL Pro League 19, which if you've kept up with Counter-Strike, that should not be a surprise. They are Pro League grinders. They took 1st place in BetBoom Daha Belgrade. They did not place in Dallas. And then 3rd, 4th in Cologne, Esports World Cup, and BetBoom Daha Belgrade Season 2. 2nd in IEM Rio. They've been in playoffs. They just haven't been able to make it all the way through playoffs.
Yeah. And that was the story last major. They're the same team.
This team is, if you want to be a fan of a team of like newer players, more up and coming players, this is a good team to be a fan of.
If you want your heart broken, support MOUZ.
Also, if you're a fan of any of the specific countries here, because they're not really represented elsewhere, Brolan is Swedish, not really represented anywhere else.
True.
Suhi,
Sounds weird, but yes.
Suhi is Poland, which is not really represented.
I mean,
there's
snacks.
some once in a while. Torzi is Hungarian. There's no other representation. Yimfat is Finnish. No other representation. Actually, Alexi is other representation. And Exertion is Israeli, who you could look at for vitality. But
there's actually quite a few Israeli players now.
There's a lot of Israelis, depending on if Drilla make it. Drillas make it. There's
yeah. There's Mestal on that team as well.
Okay. Next team on the list is a favorite of ours, which is Eternal Fire.
Yeah.
Which is a team that is headlined by two players. It's the Xantares and Wicadia show. Not to denigrate the other players, but Xantares...
And recently it's been very much the Xantares show as well.
So Xantares was one of the best riflers in the world for a very long time. He has incredible first bullet aim.
For my money, he still is. I love Xantares. I think he's great.
He played on Big for years, was good on Big, then came back to Turkey, made a Turkish team. And it took they took him a little bit to get his feet wet and get like stable.
Yeah, this team took ages. So Eternal Fire / they used to be Space Soldiers. This team took ages because they could not find a fifth. They kept rotating in a different fifth, and everyone was just like, "This team is like give it up." And Major, I remember Major tweeting like, "We just haven't found the right combination yet. Stick with us." And I was very tempted to like sarcastically tweet at him, and I'm glad I didn't, because they found Wicadia from somewhere, and ever since then they went from like 80th in the world to like 8th almost overnight. Like they just won loads of games, beat loads of good teams, and I was like, "Oh, okay, like this team's serious." And they, to be fair to Eternal Fire, a lot of teams who do that don't stick around in the top 10 for a while. Eternal Fire have been, they've had moments where they've been wobbly, they've had tournaments where they've not been good, but they've largely stayed around like the 8th in the world spot for quite a while now. I feel like we had this conversation last Major again. Like they were, they haven't changed much since the last Major, and they went out in quarterfinals last Major.
I think in last Major, no, they went out in the quarterfinals. It just doesn't show 5th, 8th on the page I'm looking at.
No, I'm sure they did because I was there.
You were there.
But like that sadly appears to be their ceiling, because even though, again, like you have to have 2 stars at least to compete against any of these top teams. They have that, but sometimes like Wicadia is a bit flaky, and sometimes the supporting cast just isn't quite there. Calix is, he's fine, but he's not as good. He's not a Perfecto. He's not a Bit. He's not. He's not a JKS. Like he's not quite there.
So for this team, you can compare like player to player. You can generally compare Xantares to most other top players in the world and feel pretty confident or
it's like,
at least
it's not
okay.
that bad,
You can compare Wicadia to a lot of second best players in the world and feel okay. I won't say you feel good, but I think you feel okay.
I think Wicadia versus like you're saying Wicadia versus Nico. I'm
not saying Nico, but you go and look at like, I don't know,
Shiro.
Well, not any of the teams above it that we have talked about.
This is
teams
kind of my
that
point,
we will talk about. Yeah,
this is why they're bottlenecked, just because they don't. Wicadia's not quite as good as like some. Like the problem is that there's so much talent in these top tier teams that you have to have so much time to compete. What Eternal Fire have is a system. They have a team. They speak in their own language. Like they have all the benefits of a national team.
I was gonna say that's a very good point. Before we move on, is that the only team that is all speaking the same language that we've talked about so far is Spirit, who are all speaking Russian. Every other team has been a mix of European or, in the case of G2 and Liquid, North Americans.
Yeah.
But this team does speak fully in Turkish. The other player I want to highlight very quickly is Woxic. If you used to watch Counter-Strike, you'll remember him from MOUZ Sports.
Woxic, yeah.
You'll remember Woxic. He's left-handed. He also has an incredibly high sensitivity.
Left-handed. He plays left-handed, man. It's so wrong.
Yeah, his mouse is in his left hand. That's not like
that's why they won't win the Major.
So this team,
I'm willing to go on record.
Since the last Major, they took first place in CCT Global Finals, 3rd, 4th in Sky Sports Championship, 3rd first in an event that doesn't matter, second in Bet Boom, Daha Belgrade Season 2, and second in Pro League Season 20, which just happened recently. That was a big deal for them to have made finals in that Pro League. They did lose to Navi, though.
Yeah, they are a very good team who aren't quite and probably won't ever be great, but they're a fun team to support. I'll say that.
They are definitely fun. A team that is not as fun to support, but you probably have heard of this team. The last team in our playoffs section.
Yeah, which... Look, I might swap these on Astralis, I'll be honest.
I know you will, but I'm going to go based on overall is FaZe Clan.
FaZe are exactly the same team they were last major, except they're kind of bad now. That's literally it.
Yep.
If you've never watched FaZe before, if you've never watched Counter-Strike before, FaZe are the equivalent of Real Madrid, where they will play really badly and then win really important games on stage, because Carrigan's clap is like Carlo Ancelotti raising his eyebrow. It's the same thing. They'll be losing, Carrigan will start clapping, and then they'll just win every round and they'll win, and they'll just be bad at the same time.
It's kind of T1 in the last 2 years.
Yeah,
League of Legends,
but also a bit worse.
Don't win finals.
Yeah, FaZe 2 years ago were really, really good, and part of that was that they were just so good on stage. Big games, they would go down and they would always come back, like fucking Rocky Balboa. Now they sometimes win big games. Their only skill is winning big games. The problem is I just don't know if they're gonna get to playoffs to even show that. So I just don't think they're that good anymore.
So some players to watch on this team. I'm gonna go with the two of the three younger members on this team in Rops and Frozen.
Both are the two best players.
They're both exports of the MOUZ Academy, and by MOUZ Academy I mean MOUZ Sports as the academy to FaZe. And Rops has been excellent for a very long time. There was a bit of a dip about 8 months ago, but he's kind of come back from that and seems to be as good of a player as he used to be. Yep. And Frozen has got to this team after Twists went back to Liquid, and Frozen has been quite good. The problem is not with those two players on this team, though. Carrigan is not the same player he used to be. He is an excellent...
He's just the same player he's always been. He's sort of just the same.
Yeah.
He would never... Carrigan would be 55 years old. He would still, drop 30 on you in the dumbest game possible, and then, just drop 7 for every other map of the tournament. He will just do that. That's the thing. There's 3 reasons to support this team. One is you just you love the old heads. You love Carrigan because he's been around for a long. One of my friends, he just as soon as somebody gets old, he likes them. If they're old and still playing, he likes them. This is true in every sport. He's like, oh, I hated Ashley Young, the footballer, but now he's still playing at 39. I respect him. That sort of thing. So that's one reason to support him. 2 is you just hate underdogs and you just like it when they lose to the big dogs, because they will just crush. They are dream crushers. Yep. And 3 is Brokey, because he's just he's the one player we've not really talked about so far. I guess him and Rain. Yeah. Brokey is a complete wild card. He will at times astound you with how bad he is, and at other times blow your fucking mind with the shit he does. He's so cool under pressure, but also so stupid.
Brokey's all over the place. Since the last major, this team won IEM Chengdu, and then that's it. They got third, fourth place in last fall final. That's the whole bit.
Yeah, they've kind of been bad.
They've been not great since, but there is something to be said for FaZe at majors. That as much as you and I have spent the last couple of months saying FaZe are not good anymore, there's something for FaZe at majors. All right, we're gonna move even quicker now. We'll get to the teams that we expect to barely not make the playoffs and finish in the group stages. So let's start with Astralis here, who have made changes since the last major.
And they're clearly the best team of this group.
And yes, and are the best team of the 4 that we're going to talk about.
Probably better than FaZe.
Okay, you can make your argument there. You've made your argument, actually.
They are better than FaZe. They are better than FaZe.
So the one move Astralis has made was actually just 1 month ago. It was not directly after the major, and it was removing Bro and adding in Cadian as a rifling IGL.
Was Blame F not there at the last major?
Blame F left in March. Astralis did not make the last major.
Oh yeah, that's why. Yeah, okay, yeah, no, I remember now. Yeah,
they did not make the major, so therefore he was not there. So they added Cadian last month instead of Bro. Their goal was they wanted to move the IGL back from Device, who had taken it over after Blame F had left within the last major. And Device was IGLing. It was okay for a minute, and then it kind of was not great. They brought in Cadian to start IGLing again. If you've watched Counter-Strike, you'll know 2 things about Cadian. 1, he's an AWPer and not a rifler.
And 2, he fucking hates Down and Yabby.
Number 2, he used to play on a team with Stown and Yabby, and there's been some other stuff that's gone on there, I think we'll put quickly. And 3, Cadian has a system. Or at least for a very long time, he has had a very specific system.
Yeah, he played a very cool brand of Counter-Strike.
On this team, there have not been that many matches with Cadian, so I'm not going to go on to a whole bit of like what they look like as opposed to they used to. But just note that Cadian is on this roster instead of Bro. The players to watch, obviously Device is a player to watch.
Yeah.
Because he could be just 2018 Device again.
He was one of the best players, if not the best player, on a 4-time major winning team.
Yeah.
Probably was the best player, I just don't particularly like him.
Stown and Yabby are the 2 other people to watch. We have recently seen that once in a while Stown will just have the greatest game of his career and then go away.
Stown is like the best group stage player of all time. he just gets yips on stage again. Like that will be the downfall of Astralis. I imagine they'll get to stage and they'll lock up.
So Astralis have placed since the major, they have placed 3rd, 4th in Chengdu Pro League Season 19, CCT Global Finals, Yala Compass, and Blast Premier World Final 2024.
Yeah,
they have
World
not
Finals is
placed
the only one really worth considering because that's the only one really they played with Cadian, and they looked really good again in group stages and then choked in playoffs, which they will do, probably.
They will do.
But they are a much better group stage team than FaZe.
And if you are a Danish fan, this is your team to root for. Though you probably, if you're a Danish Counter-Strike fan, you probably already know.
You probably know that. And if you're not Danish, this is a villain. Like, this is the team everyone hates.
If you're North American, do not root for this team at any possibility. Like, at any avenue.
Just if you're just not Danish, don't root for them, to be honest.
Yeah, you're just not Danish. All right, next on the list is Virtus.Pro. They have made changes since the last major.
Yeah.
And by changes, I mean change. Which has sparked other changes. What has happened is they have removed Mir, who was their 5th player, and added Electronic in. Now, Electronic, if you're not aware, was the 2nd best player on the NAVI team that won the major in 2021.
3rd, but yes. I have a bit above him.
Okay.
I have a bit above him for that event.
It's a reasonable thing. He was the 2nd to 3rd best player, and regardless of that specific event, he was
he was
one of the best riflers in the world till that point.
He was Simple's right-hand man. He was Scottie Pippen to Simple. Like, that's who he was.
Yeah, but he was Scottie Pippen who could shoot.
I'm not having the Scottie Pippen slander.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this team is not as good as they used to be, and don't play the same way, and they're kind of just a bit rubbish now. Like, they're fine, but they're like, they don't do what they used to do, which was kind of the whole reason to watch Virtus.Pro was to watch them become more and more perverted with the way they play Counter-Strike, and now they just kind of aren't as perverted anymore. They're just like a worse version of NAVI or something. Like, it's just boring.
So this team has won a major before without Electronic. They won it under the Outsiders name, with Flit, James, Norbert, Fame, and one other player who Yukindar. No, Yukindar won the major. Did he not?
I thought it was me. I might be wrong.
I might be wrong too. They won the major with another
Norbert,
player.
Flit, Fame, James. It wasn't Yukindar. Oh my god!
Hold on.
My favorite team of all time, and I've forgotten one of the players. Norbert
Outsiders.
I've gone
What,
completely
did
mad.
Chiron win the major? Keekert.
No.
Keekert.
Blame
Keekert.
F Junior.
Jesus. Okay, forget about this. I'm gonna edit this bit out. Keekert is who we were looking for.
Yeah.
The players to watch here, though, are Electronic, who brought in a new system to this team. They play more like...
he made them worse. And he's not as good as he used to be. But other than
and
that,
I'd say the other player to watch is Jame if you're a psychopath.
I would go completely... I would say Flit and Fame are the two players to watch. Flit is their best player, and Fame is, like... He's just fun to watch.
He's
a
fun
lot
to
of
watch.
headshots.
This team has placed 3rd, 4th in Spring, Fall Finals and Esports World Cup and Fall Showdown, but nothing else really throughout the rest of the year. They've been very underwhelming since that point.
They're kind of a bit boring and not that good.
But we've said this before, and I'll say it again. They do seem to be kind of a bellwether, a bar to get past. That if you are considered a good team, you will beat Virtus.Pro, and if you are not a good team, their tendencies will kind of overtake everything.
Yeah, fine.
Next team on the list is the MongolZ, who you can
Great
absolutely
team.
argue are above Virtus.Pro here, and I will accept that argument if you.
They're probably better than Virtus.Pro. MongolZ are the first ever really decent Mongolian team ever. They kind of came in Rio was their first major under the name IHC, which was the end of a year ago, and nobody really expected them to do anything, and they knocked out one of the Brazilian teams, one of the most legendary Brazilian players of all time, in front of a Brazilian crowd. And for a while they basically only beat Brazilian teams, but they're now like they make changes all the time.
Roster changes all the time.
Sign players you've never heard of for players that you thought were quite good. They look bad at first. You're like, see, I knew this was a bad move, and then they just like become good. They signed an AWPer called 910, who for like 6 months was absolutely awful, and is now just really good. And there was just basically no foreshadowing. He's just really good now for no reason.
So this roster has not made a roster change in a year or so. And sitting at the last major, they did not make any like a huge.
No, they've made a roster change in the last year easily.
No, they did not. I'm looking at the thing.
That's because they were IHC then.
No.
Oh, was it 2 years ago? Rio was 2 years ago.
Rio was 2 years ago. Senzu was the last roster change they made, which was a year and a month ago.
Oh, okay.
So they did not place particularly well in the major, but since the major, they have basically played in every tier 2 event. They have gotten first place in many of them.
Yeah, they did really well.
They actually just got first place in the Thunderpick World Championship Finals, which was the event that went simultaneously with Blast World Finals, which had some other quite good teams. Mm-hmm. We're not going to talk about any of them actually, but other teams that were reasonable. And they won that.
I feel like we could easily put Heroic in here.
I feel like
they're not on your list, but like Heroic are also a very good team.
Shall we put them right here?
Yeah, people kind of like Heroic because they feel like they were shafted by Astralis and their social media is funny. They're a good team who seem to be getting better, but just fall a little short. Actually, kind of similar to the MongolZ, where they're like they look really good in some games, but they just fall short in like the last game of the grand final, like the last game of the group stage or something. They just don't quite make it. But both Heroic and the MongolZ are actually very, very good teams. Again, there's a world where MongolZ make top 8 and nobody's surprised, really. There's also a world where they just go 2-3 in the groups and it's like, oh, once again, MongolZ just don't quite make it. And it's the same story with Heroic, actually.
Yeah. The Heroic players you want to watch, does Degster show up for the event? He's an AWPer that's been, and I mean this literally and figuratively, he has not been with the team a huge amount because of visa issues.
Yeah.
I assume he will show up at the event. But Degster, will he show up in the server? Tessus and Shush are incredible players. They're the only players left from the Heroic roster from 2020-2021 that was dominant online, and they have continued to be extremely good on this roster.
Nertz is also really good. Like this team actually is very talented, and on paper is a very, very good team, but just hasn't quite put all the pieces in place. MongolZ are the opposite, where like on paper you don't think they look that good. But they also have that national team buff, and they've stuck together for a year. and I think teams still kind of don't respect them as much as they should. I think that's changed, but like, I don't know, it felt for a while like Mongols weren't being studied. I think they have to be now because they're genuinely very good. Anyway, on to another national team.
Yeah, our last team in this tier, and then we're going to stop kind of talking about what has happened in the past. We'll just talk about roster moves into what we think for this event quickly. The last team that we're talking about in this tier, in the group stage tier, is SAW. This is a full Portuguese roster who have made a roster move in the last, 10 days. Moving Aradasi out for Aguil.
Yeah.
I believe it's Aguil. They have played an event since that point and won that event, which is ESL Challenger Katowice. This team has been incredibly good at majors and incredibly good in the tier 2 scene.
Yeah, SAW are a very, very good team, but I do think, even though they won their first event, losing Arostos for Agil will worsen them at this level of play. Arostos was a X factor for them. Agil, from what I've seen, is like a useful player, but when they won in Challenger, it was Roman and Muteris. Mainly Roman who was carrying. You will not convince me Roman is going to carry them to a top 8 at a major. It's not going to happen.
I don't think so, but I do believe they will make the group stages. They'll be one of those teams in there.
Yeah.
All right. The tier I've deemed out in the first stage is some teams that you may know from prior majors who will come to the major. They will exist.
I think these are 1-3 teams.
Yeah, these are like 1-3 teams. The first team is Monte. Now, I'm not even going to start with the roster moves they made.
Just tell them who they've got now.
That's the current roster is Dem QQ and Krasnal, who were on the roster at the last Counter-Strike Global Offensive Major that made the semifinals. The other players are Diha, most recently from ENTS, Hades, also most recently from ENTS, but he's most known for 9, I think, somewhere in there.
I would say most known for ENTS, but yeah, fine.
Probably most known for ENTS the second time, not the first time. And then K, who's the last player on this roster who also came from that 9 team.
This team is a Polish team with one Ukrainian. I believe they communicate in Polish. Again, if you're Polish, you support this team. If you're not, nobody really cares about the team, but they're sneakily decent. They can upset a lot of especially teams below the top 4. They can upset any of those. Whether or not they will, I don't know. But Krasnal, at the start of CS2, which is almost a year ago now.
It's actually a little bit over a year ago.
It's over a year ago. Sorry, over a year ago now. Was actually one of the best players in the world. He
was incredibly good.
He's cooled off a bit since then, but he's very good. Diha has high ceiling, low floor, but he can carry against good teams. We've seen that in the past. This team sneakily is actually quite good, but there's a lot of good teams here.
There's a lot of good teams.
They're going to struggle.
Our next team on the list is Complexity, and if you're an American, this is the team for you. It's the only team that's majority American in the event.
Yeah, it's still only 3 Americans. There's one South African and a Norwegian, but that Norwegian is like the most American non-American man ever.
Yeah, this team was a top 3 team the second CS2 came out, and then has only dropped since that point and has never kind of regained their form to any degree.
Yeah, they have, again, this is a team that has a decent ceiling. This team, we have seen them be really good. We've seen all these players play well. It's just they rarely all play well at the same time. But what Complexity do have in their favour is a genuine star that a lot of teams don't have. And I'm not talking about their logo.
No, Alige is one of the best riflers to come out of North America. I won't say the best.
He's one of the best players ever in Counter-Strike. He is, in North America. He's not like Mount Rushmore, but he's Mount Rushmore in America. But he's not like Mount Rushmore in Counter-Strike total. But there are very few players who have the pedigree Alige has. He has been consistently a very, very, very good rifler. And he is, as you say, American. It's rare to see a player who is not only so good, but so what's what I'm looking at? Eloquent's not quite the word, but he like carries himself so well. He like typically Americans,
He's very
even when they're good, are a bit unprofessional. Elite speaks very well. He's an ambassador for the whole region, and he's a wonderful, wonderful player.
I will say, if you are a fan of hair or lack of hair, this team has you covered on both fronts. Halserk's got a mullet, and Elysian Grim are both bald out of choice. So, depending on your opinions on hair, they've got you covered on both sides. And then our last 1-in-3 team out in first stage team that I've got here is GamerLegion. This is a team who has made about 1 trillion roster moves.
Yeah, they're always making roster moves.
Yeah, so this team made the major finals in Paris at the end of Global Offensive, and they've completely retooled their roster after people got sold off, brought back in, etc., etc. This roster is now Volt, who was from that Into the Breach roster that also went quite far in
who no longer is British, by the way. He used to have a UK flag, so that Into the Breach were UK, but he's actually Romanian. He's, I think, dual citizen.
I think he is. I remember seeing that. Slend, Flamus, ZTR, and Towson. Some of these players you may have heard of if you're fans of the Overtime on Inferno podcast and you've watched for a while. If you're not, you've never.
If you're like deep in Counter-Strike lore, you know, like if you watch every game that you can watch, you know some of these players, and from what I gather, they're actually quite good as well. I'm yet to be convinced on some of them, but I'm told some of them are very good.
They've been playing almost exclusively in the Tier 2 scene. They've played about 1 million different CCT tournaments since the last major, and they've done okay in them. Mm-hmm. I expect them to make the major. They kind of just have that vibe, but I don't expect them to go particularly far.
I'm not convinced they're... I think they're the loosest include on this list.
Let's talk about the next tier we're going to talk about as a unit.
Yeah.
This is the Brazil tier. There are 4 teams here that I expect to make the major from Brazil. That would be Furia, Imperial, Pain Gaming, and MIBR. Or I expect 3 of the 4, depending on how good North America is on a given day.
There's also Legacy, who are actually quite decent.
There also is Legacy. I chucked these 4 teams in.
Yeah, I would just add Legacy, I think.
Right.
We saw at Challenger that they actually have a pretty decent level and can compete with a lot of these teams. You don't necessarily have to throw it in on the picture, just like... Legacy are also half decent. But yeah, the reason we have them all in one tier is it can get difficult to differentiate between them, especially for somebody who isn't that invested, which maybe if you're watching this, you're probably not that invested in the Brazilian scene. And if you are... welcome, obrigado.
Thanks for the view.
Obrigado. No. But I think Furia have nearly always, since about 2019, been the best team in the region. Maybe a little bit later than that. Basically, ever since Cold Zero was bad, which was, after he won 2 majors, he just became bad. That team died. And then Furia have basically been the kings of Brazil ever since. But there's been like this real battle between Pain, MIBR, and Imperial. And the problem is they've all been about the same level for the same amount of time. And it gets... like the real battle is, can you remember which players on Pain and which players on MIBR? And which players on Imperial?
They switch every 2 minutes.
And which players on Legacy?
But I truly believe this tier, as like this group... as a country right now, the Furia team themselves don't feel as good as they have in a while.
No, Furia they had a good event in Rio.
They did have a good event in Rio,
which is a good sign.
But they're the most vulnerable to any of the other 4 Brazilian teams that you just touched on.
See, you say that. I think in Brazil, Furia aren't as vulnerable as they are. Outside of Brazil, they lose to anyone. I always feel like in Brazil, they always just do a little bit better than these teams. They're just always a little bit better.
Yeah, but I feel like outside of Brazil, Pain has shown us recently that they are maybe a better team than Furia.
So Pain...
This is the problem.
I used to really like Pain, especially when they had Skulls and Big Azera. They still have Big Azera, who is actually... If you're looking for a player to root for out of these, Big Azera is like the nicest bloke alive. He has been on this team for a long, long time. He could have moved to a better team if he wanted to. He's a really, really good player. He's an in-game leader.
Terrible view model.
Terrible view model, yeah. So maybe don't watch him on that alone. But no, he's a guy who is easy to root for. He constantly signs players you've never heard of to this pain team and turns them into something decent. The problem is they're only ever decent and they will always disappoint you. MIBR have they made, was it semi-finals at Pro League and lost to Eternal Fire, which is like a real marquee result. But the problem is nobody really people just forget that because MIBR are just, again, everyone sort of groups these teams together because they're hard to differentiate between and those stories are hard to tell.
I will say, if you're looking for a Brazilian team to watch, that you want to be a fun Brazilian team, because I will say that if Furia are not doing well on a given day, they are not the most fun team to watch. MIBR is your bet for fun Brazilian Counter-Strike because they have Insani and Lucauzi.
Yeah. Like any of these teams can be fun. Like Imperial have got Phelps, who I always think is a fun player to watch. Dissenti in no way are half decent. Legacy even have Dumao, who I don't know
incredible.
Again, nobody watching this video watched ESL Challenger because not many people watch ESL Challenger. He was sensational at that event. He's probably the only reason Legacy are on this list because he can. Him, Barton, and Lato used to be a really dangerous trio. Barton's kind of not really good anymore, but Dumao and Lato are still good. Dumao is really talented and actually one of the better players. The irritating thing about these Brazilian teams is if you mash them all into one, you could build like one or two really good teams. But instead, we've got 5 teams who aren't quite that good, and that's kind of the annoying bit.
The one bit I want to say before we move on here is the one major roster move that happened between these teams, which is Furia. The major roster. So Skulls is now on this team via Liquid, but the Skulls on this team is a big thing, but I think the bigger deal is the player who's no longer on this team, which is Art.
Yeah.
And
who's he's on Fluxo. Yeah, Fluxo.
Yeah, he's on Fluxo now. He was replaced by Kai for a while, who was a player who was deemed not prepared for Tier 1 Counter-Strike, who is also on Fluxo now, by the way.
Yeah. It's a bit mean to just say he was terrible, but he was also kind of just terrible. So
terrible.
Sorry.
So, just for your knowledge, if you used to watch Furia and you used to look at Art as this aggressive IGL, they are a different team now. They are now IGL'd by Fallen again.
But that's also cool.
It is also a cool thing, but it is a different style of team at this point.
Yes. But Fallen is maybe, in Brazil, maybe the only possible aura upgrade.
Over Art.
Over Art. Art has incredible aura, but nobody beats Fallen for aura in Brazil. He's like fucking Virat Kohli in India. Like he's God, and that will go straight over your head.
Yeah, that went over my head.
Virat Kohli is an incredible cricket player who's just basically treated as royalty in India. Everyone loves him.
All right, and now we get to the don't make it out of the RMR tier, which are teams that, if I was to look at them on paper and look at how they've done the last couple of months, I do not expect them to make it out of the RMR. We'll start with the first team on here, which is to no surprise if you've paid any attention to us recently, which is Falcons. This is the team. This is one of the most expensive teams in Counter-Strike.
This is the worst team ever assembled to have won 15 majors between them. There's basically no equivalent I can think of in a sport I've watched where it's maybe something like the Lakers in the last few years where they've just got all these big name players, but they're just none of them are at their peak and they're all just it's just really sad.
Between the coach and the players, the average major trophies is 2.3.
Yeah, it's insane. They have Simple, the greatest player of all time,
who has the middling amount of trophies on this team at 1.
At 1. Yeah, he's but then you've got MOUZ, who has 4, and is there is. I don't think there's a single Counter-Strike fan in the entire world who doesn't think MOUZ is really good, and yet he just looks bad on this team. It makes no sense. Snappy, who actually has 0, and Madden, who also has 0, but were very, very good pieces on a very, very solid Ents team last year, who were like the third or fourth best team in the world for a long time, despite being like essentially bought with like buttons and promises. And then you have Dupree, quite literally the man who's won more majors than anyone ever. If you have to describe Dupree, two of the players who are considered the greatest of all time have won a major with him, and neither of them have won it without him, whereas he has won with it, both of them, and without both of them. Both Device and ZywOo have never won a major without Dupree, and he has won it without them.
And I don't believe that Simple had to beat Dupree to win the major either in 2021.
I don't remember.
But Dupree is, and I will say this with full certainty, the most winning player in Counter-Strike.
He's won more majors than anyone else. He's probably won more trophies than anyone else. He's also like kind of like he's on his way out. But
yes,
he is a legendary player. Aizyesque is not at the end of his career, and by all accounts should just be amazing. Simple was the greatest player of all time, but took a massive break. He's just come back. Look, if you like chaos,
this is a chaos roster.
You don't like and you don't like the beaten track. This is kind of a team to support, because they're also like I'm not gonna lie to you. They're owned by the Saudis. So people don't like them for that reason. People want them to fail as well because they got such big names and because of that. So if you're a bit of a contrarian, maybe you want this team to do well. It's also just fun to watch Simple playing again, even though he's not quite as good as he used to be. The problem is that the team is bad. It's really bad.
It's not good. Again, and we haven't mentioned the coach, which is important to mention on this team, because it's Zonic, who was the guy that brought Astralis to 4 major wins and Vitality to another one.
Yeah, he's also got 5 major wins.
So, yeah, but this team sucks.
Yeah,
and I don't expect them to make it out.
They're terrible, and it's quite hard to explain why they're quite as bad as they are. But they're also old, so it's not even like they can get better. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're just kind of doomed.
The next team on our list is Ninjas in Pyjamas, who, as of today, made a roster move.
Yeah. For the RMR specifically.
For the RMR specifically, they are all over the flipping place.
Yeah.
But this NIP team, I included them on this list not because I expect that most Counter-Strike fans that are... If you're a Counter-Strike fan, you're watching this, you probably go, why is NIP on here? It's not just for me to dunk on NIP. I wanted to include teams that people who, if you haven't watched in a couple years, would know. And I think NIP, regardless of how good of a team they are, which the answer is not good...
they're bad.
They still have a massive Counter-Strike brand.
Yeah, but that brand is dwindling every day.
Yes. This team is not good.
We can talk about who's on this team. They're back to being a majority Swedish roster. You don't care. This team's bad. Like, their best player isn't even Swedish. They got a majority Swedish roster. Their best player is Wrinkle, who you might have heard of if you're an avid Counter-Strike watcher. He's pretty good. He's kind of in prison on this team. They're bad. We might look stupid in a month, but they're not very good.
They have won an tournament in the last 7 years.
Yeah.
And it was
IEM 7 years ago.
No, it was IEM Fall Europe in 2021.
Oh, okay. They won Oakland in 2017.
They won Oakland in 2017.
Yeah, but this team has been consistently bad through roster changes, which is impressive.
I will note that roster had Device on it when they won that event. Which was a thing for a bit. Next team on our list is Big. I included them. If you're a German fan,
harsh.
You think
they're
Big
better than GamerLegion? Come on.
You think they're better than GamerLegion?
Look, it's a major, and they have a Bad News Eagles player.
Oh shit, you're right. All right, I'm moving
them. soaring into the first stage to go out.
So
that was probably not a good hand gesture to do. We're talking about German team.
So the players I want to note on here, there are 3 of them, and neither of them are the Bad News Eagles player. Tabson has long been considered one of the best German players to touch Counter-Strike.
Yeah,
he is not the same. Yeah. He's not the same player anymore.
Yep.
but he was for a very long time, and I think it's worthwhile noting for that. Searson, if you want to watch someone play op and play absolutely nothing else but op and scout,
Yeah,
Searson's your guy. He only uses the op and scout.
Do you know what it is about Searson is? If he wasn't like German and boring, he would be really popular because he's actually a really cool player, but you just don't notice because he's on a really boring team and he's kind of uninteresting, and he also he kind of shits it on stage. And I think there's like a crowd at every stage, so
yes, there will be.
He might just be a bit rubbish this event, but I like Searson.
And the last player I want to note is JDC, who is a MOUZ Academy export here. I think
I legitimately, you can watch JDC for like 10 games. I have no idea how good he is.
Yeah, he is a very big X factor for this team.
He's great, but I don't know how good he is.
I have no clue.
Not a clue.
Next team on my list is Cloud9. Switching my list as we go through. Yeah. The reason I bring them up is the same vague reason as NIP. They are a huge name in Counter-Strike that people will go, why didn't you put Cloud9 on here?
Last Major, they were kind of a big player, and now they're not at all.
Yeah, so they have made every roster move since the last Major.
Yeah.
Just to remind you, I'd like to remind people what the roster for the last Major was. It was Shiro, Buster, Electronic, Perfecto, and Hobbit.
Yeah, they have none of those.
They have none of those players. They are now Boomich, Inters, Axile, Heavy God, and Icy.
Yeah.
No, Axile was on the Major team. Someone that I just said wasn't.
Yeah.
Whatever. This team is not good.
Yeah, it's like on paper it's kind of fine. Like you're like, if Axile hits top form and you've got Heavy God, like that's actually kind of a rifle core that can carry you. And then it's just like, but Axile kind of hasn't hit form since the game went back on LAN for the most part. Heavy God's good, but he's not that good.
No.
And then you've got Boomich, who came back from kind of he was on a bit of a
obscurity.
Break. Yeah, he was on a bit of a break from top tier Counter-Strike. Icy, who's fine. Again, he's fine, but he's not set the world alight. He's just he's just waiting for this team to do something. There's just not quite enough firepower.
And Inters, who was removed from the first version of this team because everyone didn't want him on this team.
And he was the first cut on a TSM team that had 3 support players, and he was the first one they got rid of, I think.
Yep.
He's not people. I'm not getting into it. People talk about how good Inters is, and he's just bad. Like he just happened to be the support player on a good team. He's not actually good.
And then the last team we need to talk about today is a team called Alter Ego. And even if you pay attention to Counter-Strike, you probably don't know this team. But Elliot and I needed to talk about this team because we always do.
This is our team. This is the team we're backing. They will not make it out of the RMR, but they're the official Overtime on Inferno team. Alter Ego. They are a mishmash of odd job players brought together for one last run at the RMR. They've got a Korean player. Koreans traditionally don't really play Counter-Strike. There's never really been any good Korean Counter-Strike players. Exine is the closest thing we've had to a decent Korean player. He's on this team. BN is a sort of... BN hard to explain. He's kind of like...
Bentet was one of the best players on a Tyloo team that was considered the only Asian team for a very long time. He came to North America, almost kind of performed, left North America, and just traveled the world he played on Asian super team after Asian super team after Asian super team. And the reason I note Asian super team is because he and Exogen have been playing together for a while. They've played on some weird teams together. He also went and played with the Australians on Extremum. Yeah. That would be the old Renegades roster. Yeah. He's been all over the place, but his big deal is that he speaks basically every language ever.
He speaks a lot of languages.
He speaks a lot, and he's one of the few people that is able to communicate with a bunch of Asian players. Yeah. If you're going to make an Asian mixed team, he's the guy to do it.
BN is an extremely talented player who, in the start of his career, was considered... Actually, he was a very hyped up prospect everyone expected him. Not everyone expected him, but there was like this belief that he could be a superstar player. If you could go back in time, if he could go back in time and redo his career, I think he could do it. He could have a much better career. He made some very bad decisions that were very bad, obviously at the time, and then some that were bad in retrospect. But like he's been very unfortunate and made some bad decisions, and it's led him to alter ego instead of like there's a world where he's Jantares, not being Ted. Do you know what I mean? Like he was like Jantares level. He was a really good player.
So the other players to talk about here are Freeman, who is another ex-Tai Lu player.
Yeah, talented.
Very talented. Aid Kit, who we know absolutely nothing about other than the fact that he has played 9 maps for this team, and over 9 maps has put up a 1.68.
Yeah,
which is a disgusting number
against like teams from India and the Philippines, but.
And Dobu, who's the last player on this team, who is from the second best Mongolian team, which generally does not sound that impressive. But
it's actually not bad in this.
But I was going to say, but because of the way that Mongols have worked, that they keep filtering players in and out, Mongolia has actually become quite decent.
Yeah, there's like actually enough players on Mongolia where you're having 2 teams with like another guy who's actually okay isn't that out of the question.
So this team will not make it out.
There's more good Mongolian teams than North American teams. That's not true. Yeah. But it's not that far off true either.
M80 exists.
Yeah. It's not true, but it's not that far off true.
So that's it. Yeah. So this is our little prep you for the major thing. If we missed any teams, let us know. I'll write comments for teams that we've missed. With our little ideas here, but this should get you pretty much through most of the major, unless Paris happens. Let's be real here. Unless Into the Breach come back from the dead and manage to make it.
Into the Breach.
So with that, thank you for watching, and normally I say we'll be back next week, but we'll be back in a few days. You'll see, subscribe to Overtime on Inferno, the podcast, and listen to us throughout the rest of the major as we continue to cover on a weekly basis.
Yeah. Bye. What he said.